Boa tarde, agradecemos a participação de todos aí que estão conectados pelo Google Meet ou pelo YouTube. Meu nome é Reinaldo e junto com a Maria, Victoria e toda a equipe do IAG, a gente está organizando esse semestre, esse ciclo de seminários do Departamento de Astronomia. E hoje vamos ter o prazer aí de ter o professor Ewout Haar como palestrante. E agradecemos aí primeiramente o professor por aceitar o convite e pedimos a todos aí que estão acompanhando que desliguem as câmeras durante a apresentação e os microfones também. Podem utilizar o chat, tanto aqui do Google Meet quanto do YouTube, para indicar quem quer fazer uma pergunta ao professor no final. Então, good afternoon, everyone. I am Reinaldo, and together with Maria, Victoria, and the IAG staff, we are organizing the cycle of seminars of the astronomy department in this semester. Thanks for joining us via Google Meet or the YouTube channel. Today we have the pleasure of having Professor Ewout Haar as the invited speaker. Thanks, Professor, for accepting the invitation. And we ask everyone to turn off your cameras and microphones during the presentation. And please use the Google chat or the YouTube chat to indicate that you have a question for Ewout at the end of the presentation. Professor Ewout has a degree in physics by the Leiden University in Netherlands, and he got his PhD also in Leiden University. He worked as a postdoc researcher in USP and later on in Syracuse University in US. And since 1999, he's professor at the Instituto de Física da USP. He has research experience in condensed matter and material physics, and also in the educational field in special educational technologies. So he is currently coordinator of the platform e-Disciplinas of USP, and today he's going to talk about educational technology in a large research university. So Ewout, it's with you now. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much, Reinaldo, Maria Victoria, for this invitation. I have to say I was rather nervous because it's already been some 20 years or so since I have given a talk in English. I live in Brazil more than 25 years, all in all. As Reinaldo said, I'm of the Institute of Physics, and what I do since 2006 is mostly educational technology. And what I do in the last years, the largest amount of time that I dedicate is taking care, support, updating, taking care of everything that needs to be done to run e-Disciplinas, which is the Moodle of USP, a learning management system, and I'm going to talk more about it a little bit later. So let me start my presentation. If you just have a little bit of time, and maybe somebody can confirm everything is okay if you are seeing
Yes.
Disciplinas da USP. All right. I had big ambitions for this presentation. I promised Reinaldo to give an overview of educational technology use at the University of São Paulo. Unfortunately, the beginning of the semester started and I had to rearrange some things, but still, I think I have some interesting things to say. What I want to do today is to talk about two concepts from the field, the academic field of educational technology. And not only say what these concepts are and treat them in an abstract way, but give some illustrations. It is not unfortunately, a very well-researched history of educational technology. It's a very, very, very biased, some kinds of events in field of educational technology that I'm going to show, together with, of course, some of my own experience. And what I'm going to do today is to talk about two concepts, technological determinism and instrumentalism. And these are concepts which come from the humanities, sociology, and it's interesting, I think, for us. I'm a physicist, you are a physicist, as astronomers, we have this exact sciences mindset, right? And it is interesting to think about how the humanities think about things. And educational technology is interesting in this way because you have to fuse these two kinds of mindset. Okay, let's start with technological determinism. It's this attitude, this kind of discourse that you hear a lot when people speak about technology and educational technology in particular, is that it's inevitable. You have to use it. It's a bit like the society is always progressing in a certain direction. It is always getting better. And if you don't use technology, you are a dinosaur. It is also the idea that if you use a certain technology, it automatically determines how you teach, what your pedagogy is. And sometimes people who take this attitude have a positive outlook, and sometimes they say this is something to be resisted. The case I want to make for you is to say, no, this is simplified. This is too much simplified, right? You have to think more. Technological determinism is not enough, right? But here is an illustration. A student which says, no, we don't want to use distance education because it goes against our principles of free quality education for all. This, for me, is an expression of technological determinism that should be resisted, right? And I want to take you through a discourse which you see sometimes in the area of educational technology, which says that, well, many times there were these technological revolutions. The written language is a technology. The invention of the printing press by Gutenberg is a new technology. The internet, so the argument is then, well, all these technologies, they were new and they were very good, right? And they determined where we are now. They made what we are today. So how can you question them? As a matter of fact, what I want to show is that it's perfectly possible to question even these technologies. So we take this story, which is relatively well known in the area of educational technology, which is the critique of Socrates of written language, which Plato wrote up in the Phaedrus dialogue. And what is this criticism? Because Socrates, 400 before Christ, he was at the transition of this society which has an oral tradition to take knowledge from one generation to another, towards a society, of course, where the written word history is written up in books to take knowledge from one generation to the other. And at that time, Socrates had a relatively good critique of the written language. First of all, it said, well, if you start writing things down, you will atrophy your memory. You will not use your memory anymore. This is true, of course. But he had another more profound critique, which is that it's not good for learning. If you construct real knowledge, it is through dialogue. And this is, of course, the Socratic method, right? You have to talk to someone, and that someone has to answer, and you have to debate, to have this go and forth of arguments, and that is the only way to learn, right? And he said, very truly, if you ask questions of words on a page, they remain silent. And this is a good point, really. But of course, you know, we take now into account the limitations of the written words, and it is only complementary. We would not throw away this technology. This technology, the written word, does not determine how we organize our society and how we teach. Right? So one way to see technological determinism is too simple. Right? Let's pull 2,400 years to the 19th century. Maybe you have heard of the Luddites. These were people who saw their livelihood threatened by automation. Their automatic weaving machines of the Industrial Revolution threatened their way of life, and they rose up and were against automation, against these new technologies, and they are now taken as sort of a symbol for people who resist technological change, right? My argument here is that people who say, Luddites, they resisted change, they were foolish. These people are engaging in technological determinism, because actually you can make a very good argument that the Luddites were perfectly right to rise up. They were not necessarily against these new technologies of automation, industrialization. What they were against was oppression, exploitation, the commodification of their labor, right? This is perfectly reasonable and legitimate to be opposed to. And then later, of course, 50 years later, Marx has this analysis of the commodification of labor, which is still relevant today. Again, a danger of technological determinism is to think that that all technological change is for the good, right? We should resist that. We pull ahead again in history. Now we go to 2006, only 14 years ago. Maybe some of you still remember the Arab Spring, a popular uprising, which academics at the time were thinking about and saying, this is social media, the new social network tools, the internet, with Facebook, Twitter, the connection that the internet made possible. These had a decisive effect in this Arab Spring, in this popular uprising. As a matter of fact, now with hindsight, 14 years later, it is clear that it's not at all obvious what the effect of a new technology will be on society, on how we work, on what timescales the changes will work, right? Nowadays, we look back, for me, this is very important this time, because I thought exactly in this way, you know, social network technology will be a force for the good, for democratization, for more communication between people. And I think now, with hindsight, it is obvious that social network and social media in the hands of the wrong people can have very bad effects, which I will not go into right now. Now, in 2006, as I said, I took these technologies here at our University of São Paulo, and I started the project which was called Stoa. The idea was to take social network technology and use it for university ends, right? For educational ends. And the discourse that I had at the time was, we have these platforms, these technological platforms, which we will use, and people will talk to each other and construct knowledge in this way. If you look at this scheme here, we want to go away from the classroom where a teacher is talking to a group of silent students here, and we want to go to a network of people connected through these new educational tools, these new educational technology tools. And I use these kind of symbols here, these visual imagery of everybody on the same level playing field, a platform, right? Now, this project was interesting. It had some interesting results. There was some adoption. But the point here I want to make here to you now in 2020 is that in retrospect, just sprinkling a little bit of fairy dust, sprinkling a bit of social network technology onto existing structure is not enough to ensure good outcomes. You have to work for it more. It is not just enough to give the technology. You have to do more. And the project did not come much to fruition, I think. There was some adoption. After 1.5 years, we had some 5,000 users or so, but it may have fizzled out. There are some reasons, I think, that I can come up with. There was a friction of this horizontal network inserted in a hierarchical institutional organization. This leads to friction, and maybe connected to that is that I couldn't get the teachers on board. The adoption was among students, and the teachers did not really see what the point was. And this is a problem for the insertion of an educational technology project in an institution like a university, because if only students are enthusiastic, these students go away after 4 or 5 years. This is in the nature of a university. You have to cement it into the structure of the university, and for that it is necessary to get teachers on board, to get the institution on board, right? And I don't think I was able to do that. Second part of my presentation here. So I talked about don't be a technological determinist, please. Let's think more. Now, the second concept from the humanities, which is important if you think about educational technologies, instrumentalism. This is just a tool, people say, you know. If they say, yes, of course you are right. These technologies that we are using in education, these softwares, of course, they don't determine how things will be done. No, they are just tools. This is the attitude. And by the sound of my voice, I hope you can hear that I want to argue against this attitude, right? Which I call instrumentalism. Is the teacher will decide how to use it. So it's the idea that technology has no intrinsic values. It is completely malleable. Its users can determine completely how it is used. Now, this is not true also, right? This is what people in the humanities warn us against. And there is a historian of technology called Kranzberg. He had a law which says, yes, the technology, it's true. The technology is not only good. It's not only bad. But neither or nor is it neutral. Technology is not neutral. This is a slogan. If you say this in academic circles in the humanities, people will know exactly what you mean. Technology is not neutral. It is a myth that technology is neutral. And I want to show some examples. So what is true is that technology embodies the values of its designers. They facilitate some uses and other uses are made more difficult. Technologies have structure, right? They guide you. If you don't resist actively, you slide, you are taken into certain directions. This is the main point, the abstract point, which I will want to illustrate now with some educational technologies that maybe some of you have heard of. Khan Academy. Khan Academy is a large amount of educational content and also a software platform which they give or make deals with schools. And this software platform, students interact with the platform to learn in a certain way, right? And the buzzwords they use is personalized learning. And what I want to argue is that this tool and a lot of educational technology tools, that they embody certain political and pedagogical values. They are built in, right? And these values, if you analyze the software, you see that they are behaviorist with respect to pedagogical methodology. They are more biased to individualistic types of learning. Personalized learning is the idea that a student interacts with the software and the software assesses the student and then gives the appropriate piece of content, right? And also the business model, very often of these edtech tools are based on surveillance capitalism. I will talk a little bit more. Maybe this will work. Let's see. It won't work. Okay. If someone can still confirm that I am online?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. It just took a while. So maybe we can listen to this video from Khan Academy to show you what I am talking about.
Quero fazer esse, o que é isso? E aí é engraçado que um ajuda o outro e eles puxam o conhecimento, parece que incentiva mais. Eles gostam muito, nossa, absurdamente. A primeira reação foi tipo, o que é isso? Aí quando eu vi, foi tipo, nossa, mas que legal, porque... tem um monte de coisas para você fazer, tipo, o jogo não acaba num ponto, você pode sempre seguir em frente.
Extraído dos próprios relatórios gerenciais, eu monto os gráficos, onde eu coloco a posição do aluno, pontuação do aluno e a posição da sala. E eu mostro para eles esses relatórios. Toda segunda-feira eles ficam assim motivados para querer saber qual é a posição que eles estão. Se ele conseguiu alcançar o objetivo, passar o colega ou não, ou se a sala continua no mesmo nível, isso é motivador para eles.
Então, está falando duas coisas aqui. Há o papel motivador de gamificação, a ideia é que você dá um pequeno recompensa neurológico cada vez quando você consegue algo, e a ideia é que você consegue acompanhar o sistema de cima, pode vigiar os alunos, a turma, e criar relatórios para o professor. E esse professor usou essa forma de motivar os alunos, ranqueando eles, dizendo quem que é o melhor. Eu sempre fico pensando, será que motiva mesmo as pessoas aqui embaixo? Mas o meu ponto é que isso está embutido, esse tipo de valor está embutido no software. Outro exemplo, as plataformas educacionais do Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft, I'm sorry. I was hearing Portuguese. I started to speak in Portuguese. Another example is the educational platforms of Google and Microsoft, which I'm sure you have heard. They are wanting to get into the classrooms of our students, the world all over, in America, in Europe, and also in South America. And what I'm saying is that the values of these organizations are reflected through the systems they design, right? As I said, they have this behaviorism bias. They focus on skills, and skills as in training, right? Skills useful to businesses, skills useful to train a workforce, not necessarily the values of an educational system that wants to create citizens, right? So they do not only deliver neutral education platforms, they deliver an educational vision and an ideology together with their platforms, right? And it's interesting to really get into this. You need to make an analysis of these platforms. I'm not doing that right now. I just want to see if it's possible to show you some of their marketing speak. How do they sell these products? And it's interesting to see that these marketing materials, they reflect very well the corporate values of their makers. So, for example, Apple.
I like learning new things because then I get smarter.
Creativity and learning go hand in hand.
I thought that creativity was one thing and like school is another thing. When a teacher gives you freedom and you can learn in your own way, it definitely enhances the learning experience.
So creativity, freedom, the American way, this is the Apple way. The platform of Facebook, how do they try to sell it?
Schools and learning communities connect us with a diverse set of people and open doors to new opportunities. That's why Facebook is enabling educators, learners, and families to come together in unique and powerful ways. We built Workplace as a free platform for educators to collaborate across departments. So when Mrs. Stanley starts as a teacher at a new school, she can message her peers for advice on getting a projector for her class, or deciding what days to avoid the lunch line in the cafeteria. With groups, educators can foster connections across the world around.
Foster connections across the world. This is the Facebook marketing. And the most impressive one to me is for Google Classroom.
Education is evolving quickly. So in order to better understand these changes, Google for Education partnered with a global team of researchers to examine evidence-based shifts in classroom education. Here's what we found. Educators and parents are helping students develop new skills to problem solve, safely navigate the digital world, and prepare for future careers.
Did you hear that? Google for Education is for skills to navigate the internet, which is what Google's mission is, right? And to prepare for future careers. Well, obviously, these are a good thing. Just that the argument I want to make is that, as I said, these products embody certain values, and they are succeeding. Colleagues of mine have made a research which shows that 70% of universities and state school systems already use Google or Microsoft for email and probably other uses also. They are certainly making inroads into our classrooms. And what is my main point in this second part of the presentation? That my argument is that institutions should define their values, and only then choose the technology platforms, right? Not the other way around. And I have two main types of arguments to argue to not against necessarily, but to be mindful of the risks of adopting these platforms from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, right? Two types. One is the risk to atrophy your own capacity to design and control your own public education infrastructure. Because what happens is these products are offered for free. They are dumped in the economic terminology. And it's very hard to compete with free, very hard to argue that you should spend money on your own operationalization, your own development of your own tools, if there is this free tool available. But then this will lead to atrophy of your own capability, and then later you be completely dependent upon these platforms of third parties, right? This is one type of argument. The second type of argument is the surveillance capitalism argument. It's the risk of, if you give your data to these large Silicon Valley corporations, you risk to commodify your students' behavior. What does it mean? Sometimes people have the idea, these platforms, they take our students' data and they sell them, but that's not really how it works. They don't sell your data or your child's data. What they sell is behavior modification instruments. This is the argument of Shoshana Zuboff, which she made, the Harvard academic that coined the term surveillance capitalism. All of these clicks, the interactions with the platform that we do, are packaged into instruments, and then the most well-known instrument is the one of Google, which they sell to people who want to sell propaganda. But there are other ways to make behavior modification instruments, more dangerous ones, right, which can decide elections even. So this is a risk, and I think we need to fight it. Now, this is what I wanted to say about these two concepts, technological determinism and instrumentalism. If you are interested, many directions to go into. In the field of psychology, there was coined this concept called affordances. And in design also, this is the book which popularized it. And affordance is a very interesting way to deal with a naive instrumentalism, right? An affordance is not a property of the technology. An affordance is a relation between the possibilities that a technology has and its users, right? So you cannot say that this software platform, this educational software, has this affordance. No, it has these possibilities in relation to these kinds of users. Right? If you want to go even deeper, the philosophy of technology is very interesting. Peter Paul Verbeek is one very well-known name, a philosopher from Holland, and they talk about how tech not only has users, there is no opposition between technology and its users, objects and subjects. No, you have to think more of it that tech shapes us, we shape tech, and actually the technology is an intermediary. It is mediating our experience of the world, right? Or you can go to social studies of science. For example, a very well-known person who made a very well-known article in 1980, do artifacts have politics? And the answer is yes. Artifacts, technologies have politics embodied in them. This is the point that people from the humanities want to make clear. And this is also very much true for educational technology. Okay, I'm already getting to the end. A few slides about e-Disciplinas, the open source based learning management system, which I started in 2009. It grew as a sub project of the Stoa project that I talked earlier about. It's made out of Moodle. Moodle is an open source software, and we customize it. We gained institutional support. We update it very frequently. And an interesting point to make about e-Disciplinas is that its adoption was not imposed exactly from above. It is not like Mackenzie, which is a private university. There's a historic rivalship between USP and Mackenzie for people who are from abroad. In Mackenzie, the provost, the leader of the university, can call every teacher of his school and say, you are going to use it. This is impossible to think about at a university, like a big research university, like the University of São Paulo, of course. But instead, what we had was a slow and continuous grassroots adoption since 2009. And what I want to show you is that this put us in a relatively good position in an otherwise extremely bad situation. So here are the uses and the use of e-Disciplinas in the last eight years, for which I have the data relatively easy available. And if you look between 2012 and 2020, there is a steady growth of about 30% per year. And if you look, the growth was not so extreme and in March, right? Last March. But its use grew by a factor of 3. This is the number of interactions that people have with the platform. So what I want to show with this is that a lot of people already were using this system. 2/3 of students, half of teachers, they already were very familiar. And this was, as they say in Dutch, a happy accident in a bad situation. I don't know exactly how you would translate that. This is also adoption data from 2012, 16, 2020 here. It's a little bit different data. These are enrollments with a corresponding online presence at the e-Disciplinas platform, right? And well, it goes from 6% in the beginning to 2/3 now, and I think in the second semester it will be higher. But what I want to call attention to are the extreme disparities between two schools, IAG and the law school, right? The School of Law. And for some reason, many more teachers were using it already in 2016 in the law school than in this other school, right? And I have two kinds of explanation. One is viral, a contagious process where a teacher sees someone using it and says, I want to use it too. And then you have this viral adoption process. Another kind of process is more centralized, an external force, right? I think you cannot really, from the data that I have, at least the data, the way I analyze it now, I cannot distinguish. Both of these mechanisms surely are working. But this is an interesting point of study, which we can use the platform for. How is technology integrated in higher education's institution? And if somebody is listening is interested in, I am very much interested in open data. I have large amounts of data in principle, right? You have to get it out of the system, which is not so trivial. But I am very open to try to work with other people making use of these data, which may be interesting. Of course, not only use data, but all kinds of how students use it, where they click, what they do. All this is very interesting. And then finally, yet another way to look at the amount of use of the system. These are logins. If you look at this little square here, you see that a fraction of 65% of all undergraduate students, that was the data that I had, between January and June of 2020 access the system at least once a week, right? These are active users. 2/3 of undergraduate students of our universities are active users. If you look at IAG, you are a bit above average, right? And there are schools, the medicine school at Ribeirão and the engineering school, which use it a lot, and the liberal arts school, the humanities school, and the education school, they don't use it as much. And you can think of some reasons. One of them certainly has to do with the socioeconomic status of their students, right? The access to internet that they have. So here is a conclusion. I hope you were not too disappointed. Just making a very quick summary of what I said. You have these two concepts in the area, in the field of educational technology: technological determinism and instrumentalism, which if you have caught yourself thinking, maybe this argument is deterministic, maybe it's just a tool, right? I hope I have incentivized you. I hope I have encouraged you to think again, right? These are starting points. Technology is not neutral. It is not the end of the argument. It's the beginning of the argument. It's the invitation. If you say educational technology is not neutral, what I'm saying, it is interesting. You need to analyze it more, right? And I made a third argument that it's very important for educational institutions to fight for a commons of educational infrastructure where we have democratic and public control over its design and its values in the pedagogical area and in the political area. This is my conclusion. So this is where I have more slides, but I already talked, I think, for 45 minutes, which is perfectly enough, I think. So let's give the word to other people, please.
Thank you, Ewout. It's really many things you discussed that I never thought about. And one thing that's I mean, think about this risk of surveillance. I never thought it, but it's really a huge risk that we have always to keep an eye on it. I have some questions, but first there is some, Maria has the first question for you.
Yes, hi. Well, really interesting. You pointed out some things that I've never thought about. But I was thinking if you have an idea of why there is this prejudice that this distance learning is of low quality. What is this coming from?
There is an obvious answer, which is that there is an association there is a very clear association in the statistical sense, right? In Brazil, in the United States, where private institutions which have their market is low social economic status students, this is the same way it works in the United States. It works in Brazil also. It's more vocational. The students are less prepared academically, and these institutions use more distance learning. So there is a statistical association, right? There is a correlation traditionally in the last 20 years in Brazil between distant learning and low, well, let's say low quality, or maybe not the elite academic education that we have. So it is very natural that there is this idea in the minds of people that, well, there is this association with low quality education. These people also do distance learning, and therefore the cause must be distance learning. So I already gave the answer, I think. Of course, this is only statistical association. There is not necessarily a causal relation. This is one type of answer. Another type of answer is that it is true. It is simply true that these interactions we have mediated by the internet are of a very different kind than the interaction that we normally have. So if you want to argue that it is easier, right? You have to do more work to do good distance education. I think that's perfectly true, right? And well, this is what I wanted to argue when it said, well, there was this organic uptake of e-Disciplinas, which was a good thing because a lot of people already at least had some experience with it. Because I know that in a lot of institutions, the tendency for this emergency remote learning was to do, well, we do a lot of Zoom meetings or Google Meet. And it is true, it is not a good substitute for face-to-face interaction. You need to do more. You have, I think I already talked too much.
Yes, and I agree. Of course, the teacher have to put out a lot of effort to change the classes, of course, because you cannot expect the same. You have to change because the dynamics change, of course.
If you are in my field, my academic field, you would say the affordances of distance educations are different. They have different affordances, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Elisandra, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Ewout, for the talk. It's very interesting things to think about distance learning. I used to be a little determinist and also a little instrumentalist, a little of everything. And your talk made me think about lots of things. But I have a question about the future. You have a big picture of USP. What's happening with USP now? Do you think this experience now with the teachers that's trying to use a discipline, they have a good experience? Do you think it can change the future? For example, in the future, USP use more a discipline and distance learning, or a hybrid, something different than the traditional way we used to teach today.
Right. I speak to a lot of people. I give a lot of workshops in a lot of schools. So in that sense, yes, I have some overview. Also, I am the administrator. So in principle, I can look at what people are doing. I try to do that. As I said very quickly, you have all these data and you can go in and look, which is already problematic, of course, right? I certainly hope that everybody trusts me, right? And all of the other administrators. But in principle, this idea that you can look into the classrooms of other teachers, it is very problematic. But in practice, Elisandre, although there is this overview, you know, it is not so. My view is in practice also very limited. This is one thing I want to say. But anecdotally, you certainly have the same experience. I talk to a lot of people who say, "Well, very interesting, actually. You know, all of these things. I had no idea that you could do all these things." So, although the tendency is to go to Google Meet, to Zoom, and to just reproduce what you did in the face-to-face classroom, a lot of people are experiencing firsthand that this is not ideal, right? Especially if they have these students with only cell phones, with access to the internet, and people, a lot of people that I speak say, yes, I recognize now that I have to study more, put more energy in, and it is very interesting, all those new tools. So I think you are correct. I think that there will be a step change in the way that people are using these kinds of technologies, yes.
Now, Elizabeth.
Oh, thanks for the very interesting talk. I have a very technical question. How does your platform, Stoa, works in practice, and how deeply it has been used this time since the pandemic started?
Right, well, it is a web platform, right? It is software that you install on your service. Although nowadays, the kind of software that it is implemented with, which is called learning management systems, right? These are kinds of software which exist already since 2000 or so. People access it via the web, and you have to maintain it. You have to have the expertise to run these kinds of platforms. So that is one kind of thing that we learned to do in the last 10 years. I don't have much more technical details. Just one thing, we host our own learning management system. It is ours, right? And this is in opposition to a certain tendency that I talked about, that is to use software which is gerenciado, which is done by other people. Right? And well, to me, as I said, I think it is important to maintain control over our own educational platforms. And then to your second question, how much it is used in comparison to last year, people use it 3 times more. This is a quantitative statement that I can make. I can also tell you how many million clicks per month there are, but it's not very interesting. Another quantitative number that I can give you is that some 80% of undergraduate students are regular users. Right? This is the extent of that the platform is being used right now. Of course, we should not forget that e-Disciplinas is not the only platform that USP offers. Some people, some teachers, some classes are done in Google Classroom. Others are used in the IE platform, the Sakai, Tigia, which are 3 different names. But it's true that e-Disciplinas today by far is the platform that is most used. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Professor Ewout, I don't know if you know in deep this method that I think the Instituto de Física used some years ago. I don't know if it still uses, of teaching basic physics, scale up.
Scale up, yes, of course. My colleagues, we are very heavy users of the platform as a complement, as a way to implement this methodology, this active learning methodology that they use. Yes.
Right. In fact, I don't know in deep. I know what I listened to some students who had classes in this methodology, and I know that there are a lot of tools that I don't know if it's correct. This collocation, they prioritize the understanding of the concepts, but at the same time, for some reasons, the practice, maybe in practice, doing more exercises, in studying more in deep in books.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's for some reason people got away from this, from taking the books and doing more exercise, practicing a little more. But could you comment a little bit of the results of the scale up compared with the traditional methods?
Yes, it is not exactly necessary to use the kind of technologies that I talked about now with these kinds of active learning methodologies, right? But it is very useful because they are aligned, right? You can implement active learning methodologies easily with these educational technologies. Just so I know that we have a special classroom in its Institute of Physics where you have laptops, and during the face-to-face teaching hours, the teacher can maybe talk a little bit, but not too much, right? That's the idea of active learning, that you don't give speeches for 2 hours on end, right? Because the idea is that is not the best way to really learn the concepts. And it is definitely another pedagogical ideology, right? It is a different way to teach. And there is a lot of resistance to it within the Institute, as you probably know. I don't really prepared. I was not a member of this team, although I'm very much in favor of using active learning technologies. But I think it is true that if you do active learning, you have to give up certain things that you were used to with other methodologies. And this decision, what you want to do, it's a pedagogical and a political debate which must be had. And well, my argument here for this presentation is that this is very good. It is necessary to have this political, pedagogical debate. And once you have settled on a certain way to teach, then you can go and choose your technologies, right? So just insisting once more, this is the opposite of a school adopting Khan Academy and say, yes, we do active learning, right? Because it's true, you can say that Khan, the software of Khan Academy, it is some kind of way to use software to engage the students a lot with with the material. But in my argument, this is the wrong way around, right? You must first decide what you want to do and then maybe adopt a platform.
Perfect. Next, Pankaj. Please go ahead, Pankaj. Thank you.
Very interesting talk. So I have a very general question. So like we know that currently we cannot do a face-to-face teaching for whatever reason. Okay. But then on the other side are these platforms which has this, as you mentioned, some bias or whatever is their motto to carry out. Mm-hmm. And then the third is like the way you are talking about more, in some way the other methods. So from all these data that you have, or the experiences that you have, in these kind of situations, what would be an ideal way to engage with still in a meaningful way, in the sense that you still carry, you are not face to face, but you still manage to impart the value of this, at least some value of this face to face interaction?
Right. My first point is there is no ideal way, because it depends on the context, right? This is what all of our colleagues in the humanities always insist on. Everything is context dependent, right? In some way. Sometimes you hear this and you think, yes, I know, everything depends on everything else, but I want to know something concrete. So I am very much sympathetic to what you are asking. But in the field of education, I just want to push back a little bit more against the form of your question. In my colleagues in the educational world, they have something against the so-called good practices. What are the best practices? And the reason they don't very much like to talk about best practices is that everything is always context dependent, right? It depends on who your students are, right? Okay. But I don't want to be so easy with. So actually, your question is very interesting, because I had 3 more slides which I wanted to show you. And I'm going to. Do you see another? Let me see. Do you see another slide? Please confirm.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. You ask, what is the best way, right? Okay. This is a recommendation that I have. You can see here Zoom and Google Meet, which is high bandwidth and immediate, right? It is synchronous.
Yes.
And on the other hand, you have these forum discussions, which are asynchronous. And if you use very simple software like email, right? If you use email, you don't have to use my platform. You don't have to use e-Disciplinas. You can use WhatsApp, although there are other problems if you use WhatsApp. But my point is, you can use the kind of technologies which are in this quadrant here: low latency, high latency, asynchronous, and which don't need a lot of high-end computing software and high bandwidth, right? So if you do that, this is important. If you have students, if a large fraction of your students don't have access to all of these high tech, right? This is a general recommendation that I have. So this is what I have been telling my workshop participants during the pandemic. If you want to go from online teaching to from the way you were used to, right? So if before you did face-to-face with some online activities, now I think you should do mostly asynchronous activities, and also some synchronous, also some very short Google Meet sessions to motivate your students and to show that you're there, because a very important concept in in educational technology is the idea of the presence of the teacher. Because you are online, it is extremely important that you make your presence known in a very explicit way, right? You need to be there all the time to show people that you're there, so that your students don't have the idea that they are left alone with this cold software, right? Okay. And then with respect to assessment, first we did high stakes end of term assessments, right? And now I recommend that you go to continuous assessment during the period. If you can make them meaningful, even better, right? And finally, don't do this. This is the symbol for reproducing what you were doing face-to-face in a computer here, right? This is not what I recommend. All right.
Just a comment. So like you said that you will rather recommend the asynchronous like text and these email systems. So one of the problem, I mean, I don't know, but what I feel, one of the problem is like, see, okay, when you reply in such a sense, I can take my time, but if I have to express in front of someone, that system is lacking in there if you over dependent on just writing and expression.
It's true. It's true. It has its own limitations. People say in favor of these kinds of traditional forum kinds of interaction. In favor, they say, maybe the shy students, which were too shy to make their doubts knowable during classroom, they are more open in these kinds of systems. But you are perfectly correct. They are also slower. They are asynchronous. All sorts of problems. And the only thing I can say is, well, it depends on your context, right?
Yes. Okay. So I know that it is very broad, so I will not go much. But I do agree that once you decide, let's say you are going to a college or university, you already have a broad idea of the things that there is a syllabus or kind of education that you are going to impart. But at the same time, you want the development of these skills as well, which is more or less, let's say, in the social or whatever context you say, human resources or whatever. So you more or less know a broad context for a given chosen class or given kind of environment and the study that you are going to do. So I think with that part settled, this should not be that tough. I mean, of course, it is always tough, but in the sense that once that context is settled, don't you think that it's not that tough in that sense?
I'm not sure if I understand what you are asking. If you mean it's more difficult to know what the contexts are, who your students are in an online setting, is that what you're asking?
No, what I said is that once you have already the students, admitted, let's say, for a graduation in science, right? So you already know the kind of things that you have been teaching or the professor have been teaching, and the things that they need are the focus the way it was. So is it harder even in that context to decide what kind of thing through online that you are going to take or offer?
Well, actually, I think in the exact sciences, you do have what you are saying is true, that you have a better idea what students who are coming in, they will need, right? They need certain skills. This is certainly true, and I think that makes it even easier, right? Because your objective is relatively clear, and you can use the technologies to assess whether you have reached your goals or not. Maybe.
Okay.
Okay, Professor, thank you once more time for your presentation. Very interesting topic. Maybe you can give one hint for us about the exams, or if there is an ideal best practice way for performing exams with the students?
Yeah, assessments. A lot of people have asked me during the pandemic, what are we going to do at the end of the semester? How are we going to give our final exams? Because students will cheat, right? So my last slide was about this argument that I tried to make, that you really need to really rethink the way you do assessment, right? The high stakes end of term exam is not ideal in an online setting. If you can avoid it, it would be much better. So I would recommend to substitute a very important, only one exam at the end of this semester with a continuous assessment, a lot of small pieces, small quizzes, which by themselves are not so important for the students, but which can motivate them. Of course, they can then count towards a small part of the work. And I'm going to leave in the discussion here a document that I wrote some time ago. This is my feelings, but it's an argument, right? We had an argument now. We had a debate at the engineering school, and one professor, he said, yeah, this is all politically correct, but I don't like it. I think it's important to measure skills. We owe it to our students to do credible assessments, because otherwise our employers will not believe us anymore that we deliver good students. Now, this is certainly an argument with a certain sense, but I'm not convinced that it's the right argument. And in the context of the engineering faculty, I myself made the argument that no, if you cannot trust your students not to cheat, right, you are doing something wrong. And if you create a space of distrust between students and the teachers, that is not a good way to create a learning environment. And also it is counterproductive, because if you have the kinds of institution which don't trust its own students, which is not able to say this student, he is a cheater, right? Then you already lost your credibility by society. So I'm very much against these softwares which install software on the computer of the students, and they have to sit there and to prove that they are not cheating. No, I say you have to create an atmosphere in which you do the continuous assessment in a significant way, creating an environment where people are good learners and good teachers, and they trust each other. But I see that this is an interesting debate.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Professor. I think it was very good, the discussion, not only for this situation we live now in pandemics, but I think it will continue. Many of the technologies we are learning how to employ now, even after the pandemics. We are learning how useful are them, because, for example, before I started to use e-Disciplinas, I did not know all the resources and how could I take advantage of using them. But once you are forced to use, or once you start to learn. And So thank you once more, and thank you everyone participating and following the discussion and contributing with questions. So good afternoon to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good afternoon to everyone.